we are. My name is Bill Hosley, and I do local history around Connecticut, and I have been, formerly I was the exhibit developer and curator at Wadsworth Atheneum, and then I was the director of Connecticut Landmarks. I've done different things around Connecticut, and this is exciting to me, one of the most exciting projects I've had the opportunity to do, because this is the 100th anniversary of Travelers Tower, and what I'm going to try to share with you is a sense of what a big deal that building was when it was new and why it still matters. And so I'll get right into it. And you know, the building itself is impossible to miss. I remember years ago visiting an old timer in South Windsor, and her pointing out how if you look downriver, what you see is Travelers. It was and is a symbol of this city and region, and when it was finished, it was the 7th tallest building in the world, and remained the tallest building in New England until 1965. So, and these are some views. I like the one. Can anyone tell me where the picture on the left? What's going on there? Where do you think I took that?
The tower.
No. You're like at the Wadsworth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's just the corner of Wadsworth, and it's this little picture of George Washington that you probably most people who visit the Atheneum miss. But anyway, I love the building. I love looking at it, and this is the view from City Hall, and the view with the iconic umbrella and the new plaza and I-Quilt Greenway. It's hard to look at this picture and not think, you know, kind of wow, this is a big deal. So to go back in time, long before the Travelers was founded by a monument maker named James Batterson, who moved to Hartford in 1845 and built. His father had been a gravestone maker in Bloomfield and then in Litchfield. And he grew up in the quarry districts of the western Connecticut, Litchfield Hills. But when the railroads came to Hartford, and that's the original railroad station, he figured it out as a very young person. He was like 21 or 22. He starts this business realizing that with the railroads, you can now move the marble to the shop and then sell the product also on rail. So the transportation hubs mattered more than being right there with the quarry. And he remained a monument maker all his life, and he started Travelers in his spare time. And it's a really interesting story, because in 1857, I guess it was 59, he was commissioned by Sam Colt and a group of Hartford subscribers to travel to Italy and retrieve the effects of the recently deceased American sculptor Edward Bartholomew, shown there. Batterson delayed his return to study paintings and sculpture in Italy and began forming a collection of European old and new master paintings. Monument maker, builder, linguist, economist, politician, art collector, and insurance magnate, Batterson was eventually awarded honorary degrees from Yale and Williams College and was a trustee of Brown University, Wadsworth Atheneum, and more. And this is a guy who didn't even really have a full high school education, but he was kind of a genius. And those are his passports. These are things I spent on this project a fair amount of time in the wonderful Travelers Company archives. And this is his monument shop, which was right next to Keeney Clock Tower, if you know that, in Hartford. These are amazing photographs because they show the inner workings of an art shop, an art studio, if you will, in the 1870s. And this is what they did. And they made little gravestones, but they made these big monuments. And after the Civil War, he really cashed in. He became a major manufacturer of Civil War monuments, but he had other commissions. This is the Colt Monument. Sam Colt hired Batterson in 1853 to design the marble monument on the left there that is in Old North Cemetery. Batterson also did the Civil War monument here in East Hartford. We'll get to that. But then later, Sam Colt's wife, after he died, hired Batterson a second time to develop an even gaudier, bigger, more flamboyant monument that is at Cedar Hill Cemetery, which is where all the family wound up buried. He got these very newsworthy commissions to do this David Worcester monument in Danbury, and the Worth Monument in New York City in the center, and the Gallaudet Monument, which was on the site of, was on Asylum Street, the site of the American School for the Deaf. So these big monuments from the 1850s are proof that Batterson was really had gone way beyond just making little tablet gravestones and was now making these monuments. So after the Civil War, during the Civil War, he had been the chairman of the state Republican Party at the time that the Republicans, you know, Lincoln and the Civil War, it was almost the Democrats versus Republicans, that Civil War, in the sense that the Republicans in the North were, running these states like Connecticut. And so after the war, he'd met Abraham Lincoln. He knew everybody who was anybody in higher Republican circles because he was the chair of the Connecticut Republican Party. And after the war, he had the best contacts, political connections of anybody in the monument industry. So that didn't hurt. And he got the commissions to do the Soldiers Monument at Antietam on the left and the National Monument at Gettysburg on the right. And, 1 million people visit Gettysburg every year. So these are very well-known monuments, and that's what he did. He amassed this art collection. His art collection was displayed at Wadsworth Atheneum, where he was the vice president of the Board of Trustees, and it was the first major loan show the Atheneum ever did. That was 1868. And then his cousins or in-laws, I'm not exactly sure, but his mother was a Goodwin. And when the Goodwin family of Hartford, they were deep into insurance. And this was the Connecticut Mutual Life Insurance Company, built in 1870. And it was, again, the sort of the opening act of the Gilded Age, where this, the insurance industry was really on fire. It was growing so dramatically. And so they built this on what I think is the location of, I don't even know what they call it anymore. It used to be Fleet Bank, but at any rate. And Batterson built this. So he's gotten involved in monument making and now building construction. He builds, his Hartford Monument Company builds Marble House in Newport, the Connecticut State Capitol, and that gigantic foundation plinth under the Statue of Liberty. They did many other things. So his construction company was not a sideline. It was a big deal. And this is a Travelers, founded in 1863. And this is their original location, right next to the train station. Of course, Travelers was about traveling. And people, I don't know about you, but I'm old enough to remember, if you went to an airport, maybe they still have them, you could buy last-minute insurance on your flight. If you wanted to spend $10 and get $1 million worth of insurance, whatever it was. I never did it. Anyway, that's what this was. And it was appealing to people who were traveling on railroads. And it was the first casualty insurance company in the country. And it grew like crazy. They moved to Prospect Street, which is where the backside of the Wadsworth Atheneum and the Hartford Club and City Hall, that's Prospect Street. But at this time, in the 1870s, Prospect Street was still residential. And so they moved into this house that they bought from the estate of Henry Ellsworth on Prospect Street, was the second home of Travelers. And you can see they made additions to it. And this is crazy, this picture, because this house, if you see on the left, is in this, still there in this picture, but it's in the, they built up, they built side, they built back. This is how dramatically this company was growing. And just to put it in context, Connecticut Mutual, Aetna, this is what the insurance city looked like in 1880, in the late 1870s. So if you think about the Connecticut Valley and towns like Middletown, Wethersfield, Windsor, East Hartford, Hadley, Hatfield, Deerfield, we didn't have any cities to speak of. I mean, Hartford was just becoming a city in a sense at that time. So buildings like this kind of blew people's minds, the scale of them, the drama of them, and the fact that Hartford had, I think, I've forgotten the number, but there may have been as many as 20 insurance companies operating simultaneously here at one time. So in 1906, Travelers makes another big move. And the picture on the left there is the original, is still there, is the original core of what is now the Travelers complex with the tower. And it was built in 1906, and it was them moving now away from that house and onto Main Street and making a big statement on Main Street. Then in 1913, they doubled the size of it. The picture on the right is the same building, but with the addition, it completes it on the right side. So this is just getting bigger and bigger, and you can see during World War I, the parades, and that's a picture on the upper left there actually shows the Travelers Tower being constructed. But what an incredible, vibrant, exciting place Hartford was 100 years ago. And you can see just the life on the street, the beginning of the automobile age. This picture I'd never seen before. It's rare, and I've never seen a second one since. But Travelers had this in their archive. And what we're looking at from left to right is Travelers on the far left. Aetna was right next door on what is the plaza of Travelers now, but this is before they moved to Farmington Avenue. Then in the center, lower, is the Wadsworth Building, and then next to that is the Morgan Memorial, J.P. Morgan wing of the Wadsworth Athenaeum from 1910, and then on the right of that is the City Hall. And this picture is probably about 1915, and this is like, wow. Nobody in Connecticut had ever seen a city like this. Is the point, 1915, where Hartford, and by the way, that decade, 1900 to 1920, the population like tripled. There were cranes everywhere. It was just this massive building boom. And this just shows some statistics about the larger quarters needed as the company's resources grew. And it shows how Travelers went from having $1.9 million in assets in 1872 to $129 million in assets, like 30 years later, not even. So, I mean, it's an amazing, 40 years later, it's an amazing growth story. And this shows the floor plan, the different wings. Again, on the far right of this picture would be Main Street. And the 1906-7 wing, 1913 edition, and then 1919, the green section there is the Travelers Tower. And then they've added other parts since. So that shows what it is. Now, Don Barber, the architect, also designed the Connecticut State Library, was a protege of Cass Gilbert. This is Cass Gilbert. And Cass Gilbert was the most famous architect in America at this moment. And so Don Barber was one of his proteges, and he did a lot of work in Hartford. But this shows the Woolworth building, which at the time was the most impressive, the Woolworth Tower. It was the most impressive building in the United States, really. And it's interesting when they say that Travelers is the seventh largest skyscraper in the world, it's because nowhere else in the world was doing this. The United States invented the skyscraper. And for many years, we were the only place. Now they're, I can't even believe this. I happened to have been in Vancouver a week ago, and Vancouver is unbelievable. It looks like a Chinese city in the sense that there are maybe 30 or 40 high-rises that have all been built in the past 20 years. It's unbelievable. So it just shows you how exciting this must have been. Don Barber, that shows him in the center here, he was involved in the Hartford Times building, which is now UConn, and he designed and built the Connecticut State Library in 1909, so this is a few years earlier. So he's an architect of considerable stature. And these are some of the preliminary drawings. You know, they went back and forth with the company to decide, you know, these aren't the ones that were built, but this is how they were thinking about Travelers Tower. And this is an architectural drawing showing the original facade from the 1913 period. And then these are some wonderful architectural drawings of the Travelers Tower being built. It's, iron construction with infill and then granite facade, and it was a kind of a U-shaped building. It's really pretty fascinating. There are very few pictures of it under construction, but there are a few, and it was interesting because this was planned before the United States got involved in World War I. But then World War I came right in the middle of this project, and they had to stop building a little bit. There was a lot of conflict, about devoting resources to the war effort, etc. But it got done, was largely completed, and the scaffolding was removed on July 20th, 1919. And again, this is what was going on in 1919. It's interesting to look at a year. World War I, we were in the middle of it. Prohibition started. Women's suffrage was coming in for a landing. The Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was happening. The Treaty of Versailles. The rise of Hitler and Mussolini. And the anarchist terrorism in New York, Philadelphia, and D.C. This was a pretty big news year, 1919. And these are, again, some news stories about this incredible achievement of building this building. The building itself became Travelers' logo almost. It was really their image. And it was, the building itself was not only about housing its growing staff, but also about projecting an image of power and security. And it's the sketch of the glorious days to come when Europe and Asia will be suburbs of this city, with hourly trips to Peking by way of the poles and an 8-cent fare to Boston. God, it's so funny to read old headlines and futuristic projections. And again, it's great. And then and really realize that at the time this was new, 99.99% of people in this country had never been in an airplane. Nobody. Who flew in 1919? Nobody. A few, but Lindbergh maybe, but not many. So to get up in the tower and then have an aerial view of the city just was thrilling to people. They'd never. Well, it was so, and it's still, I have to say, to get up there, it is exciting. And the heart of the city is from Travelers Tower. These were news stories. And it's just, people were so proud of this, it would be hard to overstate this. The completion of this building was one of the biggest events in Hartford's history. And they were all the more excited because the biggest event prior to that, during the early 20th century, was building the bridge to East Hartford. And I'm sure anyone that knows East Hartford history knows there was a covered bridge, an old dilapidated wooden covered bridge for years. And then they built this glorious granite thing that was, it looked like Paris. I mean, it really was the pride of the city. And this is great. Hartford's business section, 200 years. So maybe, I don't know, no more blimps. But Hartford did continue to add big buildings, but not as many, didn't end up like this. Maybe that's good. And it was interesting. Artists immediately took a love of this building. Architects, artists, illustrators, the media, and they eventually had a searchlight installed on it. So and they lit it up. And so this was really a big deal. And these are just some of the art, the photography, and how proud people were of this building. And, it would be great fun to do a photo contest, even now, and invite people to take their best shot and submit them for a display, because that's what they were doing. And then this is one of the most prominent artists in the city at the time that it was built, was somebody named James Goodwin McManus. And within weeks of the completion of the building, he's out there with his canvas painting this beautiful picture that is at Wadsworth Athenaeum. And it was newsworthy at the time. And it's kind of, that's a beautiful picture, but you can't see that today because there are other big buildings between the old State House and it. The view has been obstructed, but what a beautiful downtown this was, and what a great picture that is. My favorite painting of the Travelers Tower is at the Hartford Town and County Club, women's private club on Woodland Street. And they have a little art collection there. And this is by a woman artist named Margaret Cooper. And you not only see the Travelers Tower, but a springside view of the Park River before it was buried under what a glorious city this was. And then Travelers went and hired this guy, Vernon Bailey, who was one of the most famous illustrators in America at the time, to do a series of cityscapes. He was a New York artist, engaged to do this amazing series of illustrations in 1921. And they're great views, snapshots really, but of the city and its most beautiful locations as it looked at that time. And other artists over the years, a guy named Walter Corder, Hartford artist and mural artist. I love the picture, particularly on the right, that shows, from East Hartford, that shows the reflection of travelers in the Connecticut River. But anyway, so this was a landmark second to none. The 700 Main Street front door, which for years was the front door, still is a front door, but they don't use it that way anymore. But this shows you again what it looks like, what it looked like. And this is, when you walk through that door, this is what you see. This is the entry hall. And it was just, beautiful architectural details, stone carving, bronze, and the inevitable portraits of James Batterson. There are 2 or 3 inside the entry hall. And then these are just some architectural details of that entry hall. Really, it's a tour de force. And I hope we all live long enough. This project has been eye-opening for me, but I think it also has been for travelers, and they're doing pretty well at the moment. And I think it would be wonderful to have sort of an open house tour once or twice a year at very least. And I think that probably will happen, so stay tuned, because it's really fun to look at all these places. And there's so much going on inside that building. It's really quite interesting. And just the beautiful, Batterson, of course, Batterson had died by this point. He never saw the Travelers Tower building. But the business continues and continued, and they loved marble because that was part of his business, stone cutting. And these are just some lovely details of interior stonework. Well, the building was built during World War I, and there were a number of travelers, employees. People from all walks of life went off and fought in the war that was supposed to end all wars, but it didn't in any event. The most emotionally charged World War I monument in Hartford is inside the Travelers Building. And here are some pictures of them, and they are commemorating the lives of travelers, employees who died in service. Upstairs is this room called Batterson Hall, and they use it, shows the picture in black and white, shows its original use. It was an auditorium, and they would have staff gatherings and meetings there. They now have a bigger room to do that, but they do things with this room, and on the left of the bigger picture is a statue of their founder, James Batterson, and this shows that statue, shows another portrait of him. Travelers went through different logos and trademarks and branding, and at one point during the early 20th century they used this ironclad knight in shining armor. It was adopted in 1905, and it was meant to signify, they called their full armor contract, that insurance would arm you against adversity, and that it symbolized honor and honesty, used on and off until the umbrella was introduced in 1960. And this is cool. You know, I mean, I learned a lot of stuff doing this. Before the digital age, money and stocks and bonds were paper. And you needed, you know, you'd buy stock in a company and you'd get a certificate. Now you get a bookkeeping entry in a digital file. But they had to have safe places to store their money and their investments. And so these safes are kind of unbelievable. And this shows, let me just see if I've got security vaults in the basement, stored bonds and stocks, 8 elevators, windows with bronze frames, interior finished in oak, mahogany in the executive offices. Oh, the security vault, the main door shown here, weighs 27 tons. So I think you're going to have a little trouble getting in there, but it's just... And I went up, the coolest thing on earth is being up in the tower and enjoying the incredible view. You know, even now, I just, you know, it was, I don't know, when I moved to Hartford for many years, the Travelers Tower had regular operating hours, and people, we've gone so security mad that you can't go anywhere. You can't get into any government building without being practically fingerprinted. It's awful. But in any event, Travelers, they may open it again, but they could do something a couple days a year, and it really would be a treat to get up there. Image management and advertising. As I mentioned, the building became part of their advertising, but it wasn't obviously the beginning of that story. Advertising and marketing had always been an important part of the insurance industry, and these are some early advertisements from Travelers. These are some later ones, 1870s. This is weird, wonderful. They hired in 1883, they hired the Notman Photographic Company in Boston to do these pictures. And they used these images in advertising to the south and the north. They had the Confederate generals and then the Northern generals. They also did one on American authors and American women. So they, you know, these are just the history of advertising itself would make a fascinating book. And just more. And, you know, the automobile age, they get involved with auto insurance and casualty insurance. And these are just some more wonderful little treasures from the Travelers Archive. The famous thing in our time, and it still continues 60 years later was in the 1930s when they adopted the Currier and Ives calendars that they still produce, and this became an important part of their image. And Currier and Ives, the Travelers Company, has this amazing archive of Curriers and Ives pictures. This became part of their image and identity. They also embraced at the same time the Rogers groups. These were little sculptural groups. So there, again, there is a art-based creative part to the insurance industry. It's not all about numbers, it's about marketing. And they were pros at it. And they produced, I know Holly mentioned, did you have a little souvenir or figure or something?
Oh, I was trying to find one. I found some online, I think
Yeah.
for $300
Yeah.
or something.
Well,
They
that's,
gave them out at a certain
Yeah.
anniversary.
and I'm sure they would bring that, but the company has a few. That is I don't know whether it's a paperweight or an inkwell on the lower right, but these are some of the kinds of memorabilia. And this is crazy. They would do gimmicky things like insuring Neil Armstrong when he went to the moon. And that was, why do you do that? So you can issue a press release. These are smart people. I mean, it's really great. I almost died. I'm going through the executive offices and I'm going, holy smoke, you're kidding me. That's the umbrella that somebody bought during their lunch hour, brought it home, and it became this trademark? You've still got the object that was bought at either Sage Allen or G. Fox, they're not sure. But this was it, and this was 1960, and it is one of the most famous branding trademarks in history. It's unbelievable. It was bought in 1959, and the Charles Brunel ad agency in New York developed the concept around it. And it's really, I'm just old enough. I'm 64. I went at the age of 9 to the New York World's Fair. I don't remember the Travelers Building, but what a big deal that they exhibited. This is like, so you've got the umbrella, bought in 59, turned into a trademark in 60, and by 64, they had come up with this building at a World's Fair in sort of an abstraction on the umbrella theme. And they hired this guy, Donald Deskey, who was a very famous architect and industrial designer at the time, who designed the pavilion for them. He is an iconic name in American industrial design from the 30s through 60s. And the picture on the upper left shows Robert Moses, who is I actually got through the 600-page biography on him. He's really famous. He was, some will argue that he destroyed New York City, but nonetheless, he built the roads, he built the parks, he was the big master builder of New York City and the visionary behind the World's Fair. And there he is in the upper left there with the Travelers executives. And inside they had this dawn of man, discovery, that sort of triumph of man exhibit, kind of very triumphalist history. And they engaged this Columbia professor of anthropology, Harry Shapiro, shown in the center there, to help them with some of the themes. And so you'd go around, you'd see these dioramas, and it was classic World's Fair stuff. It's been 60 years, and yet the umbrella, in a sense, is cooler now than ever. And I do a sculpture tour of downtown Hartford. And until I did this project, it never occurred to me to include that umbrella on the new plaza in the sculpture tour, but it is absolutely classic pop art. And it's interesting that the umbrella, as an abstracted design element, was happening just at the same time that Jasper Johns was painting flags and targets. Pop art. This was the big thing in 1962, 1963. And you go through the building and, they love their logo. There was some turbulence when Primerica, they merged with a New York company some years ago. They're now independent again, but the New York company wanted to claim rights. Well, they owned it. They claimed rights to the umbrella, and then travelers had to essentially buy it back. This is an abstract painting in the headquarters. Again, I could go on and on about the umbrella, but it's a great image. And of course, the big thing they do now is the golf tournament, which is one of the most popular tournaments on the GPA. And did I get that right? I don't even know the initials. The golf.
PGA.
What is it?
PGA.
PGA. Yes, thank you. I got it. And this is a big deal for them because, as they put it, millions of eyeballs every year are not just in Cromwell where it's played, but also on television where it's aired. And so this sense of history and sense of place, Batterson, as a geologist and a stonecutter and a lifelong resident of Connecticut, was really rooted in the history of this place. And travelers went to some lengths as they were building the tower to convey a sense of history. And you can see there's a marker on the corner of the building in granite that talks about the Charter Oak and the tavern that had originally been on the site of that building. And the Charter Oak story I won't go into, but they have a few artifacts that when they were building the building, some of the archaeology turned up. And then in the 1960s, they hired another sculptor, Francis Wadsworth, to design this statue that is on the plaza called the Safe Arrival. And the idea that Connecticut's state seal and slogan about he who has delivered us protects us, the Latin word for it, has sort of an insurance feel to it. So he who brought us here sustains us still. So they put an insurance take on it. Then during the 300th anniversary of Connecticut in the mid-1930s, they produced this pictorial map that shows the original Dutch settlement and how the Indians had been here first. And, you know, and they, of course, they embed the Travelers Tower in the center of it. At one point, what is now the Travelers Plaza was home to Daniel Wadsworth's carriage barn. This was shown here. And it was originally on the site facing Wadsworth Athenaeum. And Wadsworth Athenaeum was built on the site of Daniel Wadsworth's father's mansion, which was demolished to build it. But the barn stood, and when Travelers was expanding again, they helped pay for the barn to be moved to Lebanon, Connecticut, where it stands today. And is part of the Governor Jonathan Trumbull House, a property of the DAR. Anyway, just some artifacts. That's the desk on which the first policy was written. That's a pistol that Sam Colt donated to James Batterson. And that's one of these little cabinets that they had installed in railway stations everywhere so people could buy last-minute insurance. Well, the building is a landmark. You know, the Times building was famously for decades the place where big shot politicians would come and give speeches, and there are a lot of images like this with Travelers Tower in the background. Eisenhower, Johnson, Kennedy again. And, you know, they used the image. They used these buildings as, this is, you know, sort of before the Currier and Ives calendar era. I love this. The cover art, from almost the beginning, Travelers has employed more women than men. It is a female. These were the best jobs women could get in those days, maybe teaching as well, but it was a whole lot better than being a mill girl in Lowell. And and they had huge needs for, stenographer pools. Some women, progressed obviously beyond that. But Hartford had a huge employment base, and so they're not only appealing to women, because women make many, if not most, of the decisions in families about insurance, but they're also telegraphing an image of modernity, so that and they had these clubs. They still do, I guess, but these staff clubs, the girls' rooms at Travelers, the bowling season. It really looks like summer camp, I have to say. A lot of fun. But there was a lot going on. And I'm sure a job at Travelers in 1930 was just like the coolest thing on earth. And it still is great. And, women's rights, women got the vote in 1920, but here they are, and this was a big movement at the time. The interiors, there are a fair number of images. I had to search pretty hard to find them, but showing interiors of the building when it was new. And this, on the left, is the actuarial library, and on the right is the casualty actuarial workroom. And these, I suppose, were gender segregated, and I'm not exactly sure why men did certain jobs and women did other jobs, but these are pictures of women's workrooms. On the left is the liability department workroom, and on the right is another liability department workroom. So there's just lots of paperwork involved in insurance, and some of it could get a little boring, but I'll tell you, it wasn't dangerous. And you were in a work environment with a lot of other young ladies that you maybe became friends with, and I think it's great. Then, the tower gets built. WTIC, which had the longest bandwidth of any radio station in New England, was originally broadcast from Travelers Tower. It's not now, but it was part of, and TIC stands for Travelers Insurance Company. And there were some big events that they covered, and it linked the tower with the hottest new technology of its age. Well, these are just some pictures. Continuing interest to artists. These are some contemporary works of art that incorporate the Travelers Tower. This is like a souvenir plate. These were popular in the early 20th century, and it's interesting, whoever designed this had many choices of what to include on it. What landmarks do we include? Well, you put the Capitol in the center, and on the right there is Travelers Tower. So you get a sense that this wasn't just a prominent landmark in Connecticut, in Hartford, but it was the pride of Connecticut and remained the tallest building in New England until the 1960s. Well, I have a personal connection to this in a way, because 30 plus years ago, I organized an exhibit at Wadsworth Atheneum. And in fact, your Great River Park here in East Hartford took its name from this exhibit, because the Sussmans and others who were involved in giving birth to that park loved the Great River, the sound of it. And anyway, Travelers, I still get emotional talking about it, because as an exhibit developer, anybody in the business of raising money for creative projects knows that it's not easy. And we had, this was the biggest exhibition ever mounted at the Atheneum, and it was the most expensive one that had been done up to that time. We had 90 lenders from all over the country. And we had three major sponsors. The National Endowment for the Humanities, Luce Foundation in New York City, and Travelers Insurance Company. And these were each six-figure sponsorships. So boy, was I grateful to them. And so I love Travelers, and I think Hartford loves Travelers, and I hope you have enjoyed this. Thanks.